Welcome to Tales from the Vale. Step into a world woven from the darkest threads of folklore, myth, and whispered legends. Each story you hear is an awakening, a new chapter in a world that lives just beyond our own in the shadows. In this world, a simple treasure can become something far more. Take what Jet found, snagged in the fishing nets of his father's industrial trawler. Miles from shore, amidst the cold steel diesel fumes, and endless gray of the ocean, a piece of jewelry may seem like a miracle, a promise of fortune. But a promise scored in his hands becomes something far more, because some treasures have a mind of their own, and this one was far more than it seemed.
The salt spray of the Atlantic clung to Jet Croyle's black hair, a familiar dampness that had permeated his life since he was old enough to walk the rolling deck of his father's boat, the Sea Dog. At 18, fresh out of King Chavez Community High School, his path seemed as clear and deep as the waters he now stared into. He was built for this life, with a fisherman's strength in his 5 feet 10 inches frame, a legacy of calloused hands and a steady gaze passed down from his father. The last 2 weeks had been brutal. The ocean, usually a generous if demanding partner, had been stingy. Nets came up light, spirits grew heavy, and the fuel costs loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. This was it, the final haul of the trip. The groan of the winch was a sound of weary finality as the net, heavy with the day's catch and a motley collection of sea junk, was hoisted from the depths. As the contents spilled onto the deck in a chaotic, glistening heap of fish and debris, something caught Jet's eye. It wasn't the glint of a misplaced coin or the dull shine of a discarded can. It was a sliver of silver, nestled amongst the tangled seaweed and shells. He reached down, his fingers closing around a cool, solid object. It was a pendant, intricately shaped into the unmistakable form of a snow leopard's claw, hanging from a simple leather cord. He held it up, the silver catching the muted light of the overcast sky. It was old, tarnished in places, but undeniably striking. His father, a man more concerned with the weight of their catch than with trinkets, gave it a cursory glance.
More junk, toss it back.
But Jet hesitated. He ran a thumb over the smooth curve of the claw. Something about it felt right. It was a piece of the wild, a relic of a world far from the endless expanse of the ocean. He thought it looked cool, a silent rebellion against the uniformity of his white t-shirt, black jeans, and sneakers. Slipping the pendant into his pocket, he turned back to the task of sorting fish, the strange weight of the silver a small, cold secret against his thigh. He had no idea that the catch of the day wasn't the meager pile of fish, but the ancient legacy he now unknowingly carried. The smell of brine and diesel filled the air as Jet's father, a man whose face was a roadmap of sun-etched lines and worry, ran a hand over his tired eyes. He finished tallying the meager contents of their hold, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the numbers.
We'll make it home, Jet, he said, his voice raspy from fatigue and the salt-laced air. We've got enough for fuel, just barely. But as for profit, this trip's a bust. We'll be lucky to break even after we pay the dock fees. He kicked at a loose coil of rope, the frustration evident in the simple, angry motion. Don't know how much more of this the Sea Dog can take, or me, for that matter.
Jet's own spirits sank with his father's words. He looked out at the gray, churning expanse of the Atlantic. It was his past, his present, and supposedly, his future. But the thrill he used to feel, the call of the open water, was now muted by the harsh reality of their finances. As the Sea Dog turned, its bow pointing toward the distant shore, Jet's hand instinctively went to his pocket. He pulled out the snow leopard's claw pendant. The metal was no longer cold, it seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth against his skin. He slipped the leather cord over his head, the silver claw coming to rest against his chest. It felt oddly comforting, a solid weight in a world of uncertainty. As the coastline slowly grew from a hazy line into the familiar shapes of home, a strange sensation began to prickle at the edges of Jet's awareness. The low thrum of the boat's engine seemed to vibrate not just through the deck, but through his very bones. He could pick out the distinct cries of individual gulls circling overhead, their calls sharp and clear in a way they never had been before. The scent of the coming rain, still miles offshore, was a tangible presence on his tongue. It was as if someone had turned up the volume on the world. He dismissed it as exhaustion, a trick of a mind weary from 2 weeks of hard labor and little sleep. But as he stood at the rail, the pendant hidden beneath his shirt, he felt a nascent energy stirring within him, a low thrum that matched the engine of the boat, promising a different kind of storm on the horizon. Maybe we need to go further north and try for the colder waters? He asked his father. Find a cheaper port to dock. San Diego isn't exactly cheap for port. He started working to tie off at the port.
Maybe, his father grunted, the sound devoid of any real hope. He scrubbed a hand across his salt-stiffened beard. Further north means more fuel spent chasing a maybe. And San Diego, this place has its hooks in us, kid. We know the buyers, we know the currents. Moving is a gamble we can't afford to lose. He sighed, the sound swallowed by the gull cries. Just let's get this tied off and see what we can get for this sorry haul.
Jet fell silent, his earlier suggestion dissolving into the familiar weight of their reality. He moved with practiced ease, his hands finding the thick mooring ropes, his muscles coiling and releasing as he secured the Sea Dog to the pier. As his worn sneakers hit the solid wood of the dock, the world seemed to lurch and then sharpen with a dizzying intensity. The cacophony of the port, a sound he'd known his whole life, was suddenly a chaotic symphony of distinct noises. He could hear the low haggling of a fisherman 2 boats down, the clatter of a dropped wrench in a repair shop a block away, the frantic beat of a pigeon's wings as it took flight from a rooftop. The air was a thick cocktail of smells, the sharp tang of diesel, the sweet rot of garbage, the salty perfume of drying nets, and beneath it all, the clean, electric scent of ozone from the approaching storm. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault that made his temples throb.
I'm gonna go see what the monger will give us, his father said, clapping a heavy hand on Jet's shoulder. You go on home, get some real food and some sleep. You've earned it.
Jet just nodded, the noise in his head making it hard to form words. As his father trudged off toward the market, Jet turned to head home. He instinctively shunned the main thoroughfare, the blare of car horns and the press of the crowds feeling physically abrasive. He found himself ducking into a quieter side alley, the narrow space offering a brief respite from the sensory storm. The pendant under his shirt felt warm, a constant, pressing weight against his skin. He didn't understand why the familiar world suddenly felt so loud, so sharp, so hostile. He only knew he wanted it to stop. The walk to the trolley stop was a disorienting haze of heightened perception. Jet's eyes, usually accustomed to the vast, simple canvas of the sea and sky, now caught on every minute detail. He saw the subtle flutter of a loose tarp on a ship's deck, the rhythmic sway of mooring ropes in the gentle swell, the precise, twitching movements of gulls quarreling over a dropped French fry. For a fleeting, absurd moment, he felt a predatory urge, wondering with unnerving confidence if he could snatch one of the birds right out of the air. He let out a sharp huff, shaking his head to clear the strange impulse. He boarded the trolley, the familiar screech of its wheels a jarring note in the symphony of city sounds now assaulting his ears. His father would be haggling with the fishmonger for at least an hour. The thought of college surfaced again, a vague notion of escape. But as the trolley rattled through the streets, another, stranger thought pushed its way forward. The gray concrete of the buildings, the stark lines of the roads, the deep shadows of the alleys, they seemed less like a cage and more like a landscape. There was a weird sense of invitation to it, a feeling of potential refuge that felt completely alien. A strange warmth was spreading through his chest, emanating from where the pendant lay against his skin. The city air was a humid 90 degrees, yet he felt as if a low-burning furnace had been lit inside him. It was a bizarre contrast to the cold, unforgiving water he'd just spent 2 weeks on. He tried to focus on his future, on college applications and financial aid, but his thoughts were a jumbled mess, drowned out by the sensory noise and the unfamiliar, primal feelings stirring within him. The man of the sea was, for the first time in his life, feeling the pull of the stone and shadows. The press of humanity on the trolley was too much. The overlapping conversations, the smell of cheap perfume and stale sweat, the sheer psychic weight of so many lives packed into one space, it was suffocating. At the next stop, Jet pushed his way out, the doors hissing shut behind him. He'd walk the rest of the way. As the trolley rumbled away, the city shifted into its evening rush. The streets filled with commuters, a river of tired, hurried people. Jet felt adrift in the current. His breakup with Margreta right before the trip had been rougher than he'd let on, and now, standing alone in the bustling city, he felt the distance between himself and the rest of his family, grandparents in Florida, cousins in Northern California, like a physical ache. His parents were all he had here, and they were drowning in their own sea of debt and disappointment. Movement flickered in a narrow alley to his right, a flicker his old eyes would have missed. He stopped. Perched atop a dented trash can was a stray cat, its dusky gray coat a near-perfect camouflage against the stained concrete and deepening shadows. It watched him with intelligent, unblinking eyes. This was odd. Instead of bolting as he met its gaze, the cat gave a soft meow and leaped silently to the ground. To Jet's astonishment, it padded directly toward him, unafraid, and began to wind itself around his legs, its body a soft, warm pressure against his jeans. A loud, resonant purr vibrated up from its small frame. Jet stood frozen, looking down at the creature. Strays didn't do this. They ran. They hid. But this one acted as if it knew him, as if it were welcoming him home. The cat was impossibly light, a fragile bag of bones and fur held together by a surprisingly strong purr. Jet tucked it securely in the crook of his arm. He fished a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket, his last cash until his father settled up with the munder. It would have to do. "Don't get attached," he muttered to the cat, more for his own benefit than the animal's. "The apartment doesn't allow pets. You get something to eat, then it's off to a shelter, got it?" The cat blinked its wide, amber eyes at him, the purr rumbling through its skinny frame without pause. Jet felt a pang of guilt. He knew he couldn't just dump it in a cage. With a resigned sigh, he shifted the cat in his arms and started walking toward Holistic, a small, independent pet store a few blocks from his apartment. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and a wave of new sensations washed over him. It wasn't the chaotic noise of the city, but a concentrated blast of life, the earthy scent of pet food, the sharp tang of cedar shavings, the faint, sweet smell of catnip, and the quiet rustling of unseen animals in their enclosures.
A woman with silver-streaked hair and kind, knowing eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Well now," she said, her voice warm. "Looks like you've been chosen."
Jet felt a blush creep up his neck. "Just a stray I found. Thought I'd get him some food."
The woman's gaze was sharp, lingering for a moment on the silver claw pendant peeking out from the collar of his t-shirt before moving to the cat. "He's a handsome one, a survivor. Looks like he could handle himself on the stone and in the shadows." She smiled, a gesture that didn't quite reach her perceptive eyes.
Jet, feeling oddly scrutinized, just nodded and grabbed a few cans of wet food and a small bag of kibble. He brought them to the counter, pushing the crumpled 20 across it. "Keep the change," he said.
The woman Marisol, according to her name tag, bagged the items. "This one's got a wild heart," she said, tapping a finger on one of the cans. "He'll need something a little richer. You take care of him, and yourself. It's a strange world out there."
He left the store with the bag of food, the cat still nestled in his arm, and a profound sense of unease. The woman's words echoed in his mind. Chosen. Stone and shadows. Wild heart. It was probably just the quirky ramblings of a pet store owner, but as he walked the final block home, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something he didn't. The rusty metal of the fire escape groaned under his weight as Jet made his way up to the third-floor window of his family's apartment. He gently set the skinny cat down on the grated platform. It couldn't come inside, but it could stay here. The little patch of concrete and steel would be its sanctuary for now. He found a discarded ceramic ashtray, tipped out the stale rainwater, and wiped it clean on his jeans. Ripping open the bag of kibble and peeling the lid off a can of wet food, he quickly mixed them. The smell was rich and meaty, and the cat watched his every move with an intense, unwavering focus. He set the makeshift bowl down, and the creature attacked the food with a desperate hunger. It would need shots. And a name. He watched the cat eat, its gray fur looking almost silver in the glow of the streetlights. An odd name drifted into his head, feeling both strange and perfectly fitting. How about Moonpetal, girl? The cat paused its frantic eating. It looked up at him, its amber eyes seeming to hold an ancient intelligence. Then, in a clear and deliberate motion, it gave him a single, distinct nod before returning to its meal. Jet froze, his hand hovering in midair. He stared. He blinked, expecting the image to correct itself, to resolve back into the normal, understandable world he knew. But it didn't. Cats didn't nod. They didn't respond to names with calm, human gestures. A cold knot of disbelief and fear tightened in his stomach. He was exhausted, he was stressed, but he knew what he had seen. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was standing at the epicenter of the shift. Jet tapped lightly on the window pane. A moment later, his mother's tired face appeared, and she slid the lock open. Jet slipped inside, the familiar scent of home a stark contrast to the city air. His mom glanced past him at the fire escape.
"A stray, Jet?" she asked, her voice flat. She didn't argue or even seem surprised, just weary.
He quickly stashed the remaining cat food in his closet before slipping back outside, leaving the window cracked to let in the evening cool. He sat on the grated metal, the city sprawling beneath him. Moonpetal, finished with her meal, was meticulously cleaning her face. "You know," Jet began, his voice quiet, "I just graduated and I had all these plans. Explore the world, go rock climbing with my friends, ski in the Rockies, and maybe see the Ozarks. Then reality hit, and I needed to make a living." Moonpetal paused her grooming and looked at him, her amber eyes seeming to hold his gaze. "I bet you've had all kinds of adventures, haven't you, girl?" He sighed, a plume of breath in the humid air. He felt a strange sense of ease out here, perched 3 stories above the street. The hard lines of the buildings, the deep pools of shadow in the alleys, the intricate latticework of fire escapes, it felt less like a city and more like a vast, vertical landscape of stone and steel. A strange, natural terrain. The cat let out a soft chuff, a sound more like a quiet cough than a meow, and settled down, curling into a tight ball beside him as if standing watch. For the first time all day, the chaos in Jet's senses began to quiet, replaced by a strange feeling of calm. He didn't belong on the sea, and he didn't belong in the bustling crowds. But here, in the high, hidden places of the city, with a strange cat as his only company, he felt, for a terrifying and exhilarating moment, perfectly at home.
His father returned late, the scent of fish and defeat clinging to him. He pressed a handful of bills into Jet's hand. "It's what's left," he'd said, his voice heavy. "After rent, dock fees, fuel, all of it."
Jet counted it. $123. He let out a dry chuckle at the ironic number and tucked $60 away into an old shoebox he used for savings. It wasn't much, but it was something. He went back to the fire escape, the small amount of spending cash feeling heavy in his pocket. Moonpetal was waiting, a silent gray sentinel in the urban twilight. "Hey Moonpetal, what should we do?" he asked, the question half serious. The cat looked up at him, and again, gave that impossibly deliberate nod before standing. Without a moment's hesitation, it began to descend the fire escape with a fluid grace. "Okay, so I didn't imagine that." The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Curiosity overwhelming his caution, Jet swung his legs over the railing and followed. The moment his feet hit the rungs, something shifted. He moved not with his usual deliberate care, but with a swift, silent agility he'd never known. His hands and feet found their holds instinctively, his body coiling and unspringing as he descended, keeping pace with the small cat. It was effortless. Moonpetal led him down into the labyrinth of the city's back alleys. The world became a landscape of brick, concrete, and shadow. Jet's senses, previously overwhelmed, were now razor-focused on the chase. He could see the cat's lithe form weaving through the darkness, hear the soft, near-silent padding of its paws on the asphalt. Without thinking, he stuck to the deepest shadows, his body hugging the cool brick of the walls, moving from the cover of one overflowing dumpster to the next. He felt like a predator in his own territory, the city's stone and shadows welcoming him as one of their own. This wasn't just a walk, it was a hunt, and the little gray cat was leading him deeper into a world he was only just beginning to realize existed. The little gray cat stopped dead, its body low to the ground, and let out a soft meow that was more a warning than a greeting. Jet's eyes followed its gaze down the length of the alley. Ahead, half hidden in the shadows cast by a flickering street lamp, was a man. His clothes were ragged, and the coppery stench of blood, thick and cloying, hit Jet's newly sharpened senses like a physical blow. Jet paused, his hand resting on the cool brick of a building. What did Moonpetal want? Why had she led him here? As he watched, the man's head shot up, his eyes locking onto Jet's. For a horrifying, stomach-churning moment, Jet saw what the man was holding, the pale, twisted remains of a human hand, which he had been gnawing on like a piece of jerky. What the hell? The words escaped Jet's lips in a choked whisper. He took a step back, but it was too late. With a fluid grace that defied his derelict appearance, the man rose to his feet. He was no mere vagrant. This was a predator.
My, little mouse, the man rasped, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. He took a predatory step forward. You seem to have stumbled into something over your head. And unfortunately for you, he smiled, a gesture that held no warmth, only hunger. I can't just let you go.
Pure, undiluted terror seized Jet. His mind went blank, every rational thought replaced by a screaming instinct to flee. But as the ghoul lunged, the silver pendant against his chest erupted with a searing, explosive heat. It wasn't a burn, it was a fire igniting within his very cells. Pain, sharp and crystalline, lanced through him as his bones seemed to shift and stretch beneath his skin. His senses, already heightened, exploded into a supernova of input. He felt a low growl tear from his own throat as his form twisted. His vision sharpened, the dim alley now illuminated as if by daylight. The ragged clothes of the ghoul, the slick cobblestones, the terrified eyes of Moonpetal hiding behind a dumpster, all were rendered in perfect, predatory detail. He felt claws, long and sharp, extend from his fingertips. His skin prickled as a coat of thick, mottled fur, the color of stone and shadow, sprouted across his body. The ghoul skidded to a halt, its hungry smirk replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The little mouse was gone. In his place stood a lean, powerful hybrid creature, a bipedal form that was both man and snow leopard. Jet didn't know how he was standing, how he was breathing, how this was possible. He only knew the terror was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly calm and an instinct that whispered a single, clear word: survive. The ghoul's cold, calculating mind raced, trying to categorize the creature before it. This wasn't some mundane human anymore. This was one of them, a part of the secret world, a piece of the great game. But it didn't fit any known profile. There wasn't the scent of wet dog and primal rage that clung to a werewolf. There was no hint of the cold, stagnant hunger that radiated from a vampire, nor the cloying, otherworldly sweetness of the Fae. It lacked the sharp, ozone tang of a magic user about to unleash a spell. What the hell was this thing? Jet let out a guttural yowl, a sound that was half human scream and half feline roar, and took a single, heavy step forward. The predator that had been chewing on a human hand was now a threat. It was a messy, loud variable in his territory, a beacon that could bring the wrath of the entire city down on his head. That was unacceptable. The hunter had become the hunted. The ghoul, who had relished the fear of its cornered prey, now felt the icy grip of that same terror. This was an emergent, a new player, and its power was an unknown quantity. The fundamental rule of survival in the shadows screamed in its mind. When faced with a bigger, unknown predator, you run. With a desperate snarl, the ghoul abandoned any thought of fighting. It spun around and scrambled up the alley wall, its unnaturally strong fingers and toes finding purchase in the weathered brick. It was a panicked, clumsy retreat. Jet's instincts didn't scream for a chase. They screamed for silence, for security. He lunged forward, not to attack the fleeing creature, but to reclaim his space. He slammed a clawed hand against the brick wall right where the ghoul's feet had been, shattering the concrete and sending dust and debris raining down. The message was clear. This is my ground. Get out, The ghoul needed no further encouragement. It scrambled over the rooftop and vanished into the night, leaving Jet alone in the alley, his transformed body buzzing with a terrifying new power, the scent of his enemy's fear hanging thick in the air. The adrenaline surge faded, leaving a disorienting vertigo in its wake. Jet felt his body contract, the thick fur receding and the powerful hybrid form shrinking back into his own familiar skin. The world lost its hyperfocus, softening back into the dim, gritty reality of the alley. He looked down at himself. His t-shirt was in tatters, hanging off his shoulders in strips. His jeans had fared better but were ripped at the seams. Moonpetal let out a sharp yowl from her hiding spot and trotted over to him, looking up with that same unnerving intelligence. She nodded as his gaze met hers. "So you were showing me this thing," Jet breathed, the statement a moment of dawning, terrifying clarity. He looked at his ruined clothes. "Great! There goes my spending money." A sudden sound, the scuff of a boot on pavement, made him freeze. A woman dashed around the far corner of the alley, her eyes wide and alert. She was dressed for movement in dark cargo pants and a tight black tank top, and she scanned the alley with the intensity of a hunter. Her gaze landed on the non-human hand on the ground, then snapped to a mostly naked and bewildered Jet.
A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound far too menacing for her human form. Her eyes, which seemed to glow with a faint amber light of their own, narrowed. "You don't smell like a ghoul," she said, her voice a low, demanding rasp. "Where did it go?"
Jet pointed a trembling finger toward the rooftops. He had no desire to see if this woman's claws were as sharp as his own.
The woman cursed under her breath, a string of fluent profanity that was surprisingly professional. She relaxed her stance slightly, pulling a small radio from her belt. "Target is rooftop, heading east from my position. Broke contact. Repeat, target is on the move." She clipped the radio back onto her belt, her brief report finished. Her attention snapped back to Jet. She looked him up and down, her eyes narrowing again in suspicion. "You're not part of the pack," she stated, her guard coming right back up. "I don't know your scent. Who are you?" She didn't advance, but her posture was coiled, ready for action. Her gaze then fixed on the silver claw hanging around his neck. The growl in her chest subsided, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Not a wolf, then. Or maybe an old blood. One arrogant enough to flaunt the immunity. That was a different kind of dangerous.
Jet, feeling the woman's intense scrutiny, decided that acting like prey was the worst possible move. He nodded slowly and bent down to scoop Moonpetal into his arms, the cat's warmth a small comfort. "Just a hunter, like you," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Didn't like the guy stalking around. He subtly shifted his weight, his eyes glancing at the fire escape he'd just descended. He wasn't cornered. He could do the same thing the ghoul did, go up. The thought was empowering.
The woman held his gaze for a long moment, a silent, predatory assessment. She seemed to weigh his answer, his strange confidence, and the silver around his neck. Finally, with a sharp sigh, she made a decision. "This is hellhound business," she said, her tone a clear warning. "The ghoul is our hunt. Stay out of it. If you're not a problem, don't become one."
Without another word, she turned and sprinted toward the end of the alley, leaping onto a dumpster and effortlessly hauling herself up the side of the building with the same supernatural grace the ghoul had shown. In seconds, she was gone, leaving Jet alone in the sudden silence, clutching a strange cat and wearing the tatters of his old life. He was no longer just a fisherman. He was now, apparently, a hunter. And he was officially on the radar. "Hellhound?" Jet whispered to himself as he hurried through the now darkening streets, Moonpetal a comforting weight in his arms. So, like a secret society. The pieces were a chaotic jumble in his mind, a man eating a hand, a silver claw that set him on fire, a woman who hunted in the shadows. He looked down at the cat, whose amber eyes were calmly taking in the city lights. "What do you think, Moon? Are they the good guys?" Moonpetal just cocked her head, an infuriatingly neutral gesture. "Okay, so maybe not," Jet conceded with a sigh. "Probably vigilantes." That seemed to fit. The woman wasn't a cop, but she was definitely hunting something. Something she called a ghoul. He scrambled back up the fire escape, his movements still feeling unnaturally fluid and certain. He slipped through the open window into the quiet darkness of his apartment. In the dim light filtering in from the street, he looked at his reflection in the closet mirror. His clothes were destroyed. But beneath the tatters, his skin was flawless, any scrapes from his flight through the alley completely gone. The silver pendant lay against his chest, looking ancient and powerful. It was the source of all this madness. He was a hunter, just like the woman had been. His legacy, whatever it was, had an instinct to protect him from other supernaturals and guide him into the great game. He had faced a ghoul, an intelligent predator that threatened the Vale. The Hellhound was part of a lineage dedicated to hunting exactly these kinds of monsters within cities. He had stumbled into a war he never knew existed. He pulled on a new shirt and jeans, the familiar fabric a flimsy shield against the vast, terrifying new world that had just revealed itself to him. He was a player now, whether he wanted to be or not. And his first move was to figure out how to feed a possibly magic cat without his parents noticing.
And so, this part of our tale comes to a close, but the veil is never truly shut. For more stories pulled from the shadows, like and subscribe. Until next time, remember, watch the shadows.